as well. And so we designed this presentation, or I designed this presentation to kind of hopefully cover some of the basics related to different hormonal fluctuations related to menopause, perimenopause as well, and then kind of talking about some of the different primary kinds of challenges that one may face. And I'm hoping to then kind of summarize things up at the end. And I'm hoping not to be an entire fire hose of just loading you with tons of information. Definitely feel free to kind of take snapshots of the slides, and we can also share the slides with you so you can hopefully just kind of listen and take in information and not feel like you have to record everything that necessarily is on a set slide. And we may use this even to kind of figure out what all you want to hear about and how to be able to best tailor things moving forward. So, um, everyone's talking about it. Perimenopause, menopause, Oprah aired a primetime special. Naomi Watts wrote a book. Halle Berry launched a healthcare brand, all designed to put, kind of women's hormones kind of in the front of everyone's mind. And I'm sure you've seen this, as well. Approximately 1.3 million women in the US enter menopause each year, typically around the age of 51. Naturally, in light of cancers, we may see that that age is a lot, more premature and kind of earlier, could even be 25 or 30, but definitely 35. And after is very, very, very common. And while certainly can be a very, natural part of our aging process, they can also kind of these changes can definitely be associated with some significant undesirable symptoms that, can really impact our, daily quality of life and also just overall, health. So, I wanted to first kind of give a little bit of background in terms of hormones just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And first and foremost, I think with hormones, one of the things that's absolutely crucial is with any and all hormones, it's not that you want them to be low or high. Generally speaking, balance is really, oftentimes the key. Whether we're talking about, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, insulin, other kinds of hormones, different, cortisol and so forth, we're looking kind of for balance. Obviously, there could be scenarios with aromatase inhibitors or other cases where we are trying to get, a marker or two, and thinking of estrogen, very, very low, kind of lower than typical. And we can kind of go through like, okay, how do I manage those, challenges? But hormones themselves are chemical messengers. They travel in our blood to different tissues and organs, and they do work, slowly, like over time, and they absolutely can affect varying processes from growth and development to our metabolism, to sexual function, to reproduction, to our mood, to our body weight, to our blood sugar, and many, many more. This was a quick chart I put together just to kind of look at, just very simply thinking of estrogen high or low and progesterone, and oftentimes some of the more common symptoms that one may experience and what could possibly be leading, us to experience such a side effect and what it looks like for you or for your friend, or, it could be, entirely different than for somebody else. But these are generally kind of the most kind of heavy hitters. I think it's approximately 75% of menopausal women experience some sort of vasomotor symptoms. So these would be things like hot flashes. And definitely one area that we, see regularly and can be very challenging on a quality of life piece. Perhaps even more, I would also kind of incorporate in there, night sweats if that's really disturbing, our overall sleep. But it could be palpitations, could be migraines. I definitely think about headaches in relationship to hormones. Urogenital symptoms such as vaginal atrophy, urethral atrophy, sexual dysfunction affect around 60%, 60% of women. We can see different psychogenic symptoms, things of anger, irritability, anxiety, depression, kind of sleep related challenges, difficulty concentrating, honestly, kind of a loss of confidence that's reported by about 45% of women. And no doubt the kind of the decline of estrogen during perimenopause and menopause, particularly in menopause, is definitely associated with more long-term complications that may affect our cardiovascular system, gynecological, function, and also bone health. So a variety of different areas we could take this, but just to kind of give at least a little bit of an overview. If we first just talk briefly in terms of estrogen, again, we know that estrogen definitely plays some, highly significant roles in terms of bone density, in terms of metabolism, in terms of insulin sensitivity, helping to regulate our body temperature, helping to maintain muscle mass. So yes, testosterone is important here, but absolutely estrogen does play a role, helping with our sleep and our mood and focus, maintaining collagen in our skin, the cardioprotective components, and then also helping with memory. And so you can imagine that if we don't have estrogen, that we very well may see challenges in any or all of these areas that may not be, so fun to be experiencing. So typically, if we're seeing kind of more of that dominance of estrogen, where the estrogen levels are higher in reference, then it may be more of those headaches, tender breasts, kind of collecting our fat around our hips, our thighs, maybe even constipation because we're reabsorbing estrogen. And then if it's no, we don't have any estrogen or we're really low in estrogen, then we may be thinking, okay, wait, this explains more of that cognitive fog, the loss of bone mineral density, sometimes there's different mood changes, sometimes increase in lipids, increase in glucose, some of those values. So again, balance generally is kind of having us feel our best, but it could be that diagnoses kind of have us be like aiming for a certain, area or level to achieve. So what about progesterone? Um, and here I'm, thinking of just the natural, progesterone. And generally too, as we can see, yes, diuretic, yes, could be good even for moods as an antidepressant. It helps us to utilize fat as a fuel source. Can make, sure that our thyroid values are hopefully a little bit more balanced, can help in terms of bone density, can help us with libido, can help in terms of sleep and memory. And I would say sleep, memory, and I didn't note on here, but I probably should have. Digestion, I think, is another area that if we get, sometimes I'll find individuals be very bloated and having a difficult time with gut, and they get a little bit of progesterone, and that oftentimes tends to dissipate. Progesterone can kind of turn off estrogen, so it can be very calming, for the brain. If one is still having menstrual cycles, it can definitely decrease that flow. But also, if we get too much, we can certainly have those negative, factors, come into play. Um, just in terms of, I know sometimes, again, what could be that one is PR positive and we're not utilizing any kind of, progesterone that we would be taking in supplementally. But I did just want to note progesterone is definitely different than the synthetic progestins when you're looking at kind of risk in terms of breast cancer in particular, but maybe even heart disease, fibrocystic breast, osteoporosis, as well. But progesterone and synthetic progestins are not the same in terms of their benefits and also in terms of their health risks. So we want to differentiate between the two. So what about DHEA? DHEA is an adrenal hormone. So definitely going to be one that oftentimes is kind of balanced with cortisol, kind of our day-to-day stress, you know, stress response system, not necessarily the lion is running at you and how do you respond in terms of our adrenaline, our epinephrine, but more of our day-to-day stressors. Anything as arguably we may say insignificant in terms of traffic, and I was at UCSF earlier and Colleen, and I was like, okay, that's my goal is to leave definitely by 10:30, make sure I'm home. even that, like making sure I'm here and ready for you and prepared and, can be a little bit of a stressor. Fun stressors. I don't have this stressor myself this summer, but could be that you're going on an amazing European vacation and you have to make sure you stop your mail and you kind of get everything arranged for, the animals or whatever, maybe it's your children, but, making sure we're kind of doing this. And then bigger factors in terms of family and health and financial challenges and other factors that can absolutely impact our cortisol and also our DHEA. Additionally, DHEA is a precursor to testosterone. It is a precursor to estrogen. So sometimes you'll hear, oh, I shouldn't use any DHEA if I have breast cancer. It could be definitely some truth to that, but it may be that if you're clinically low, then I would say, well, we got to look at each individual as an individual to kind of make that determination. We know, excuse me, that DHEA peaks typically in our 20s, early 20s, and then generally will kind of decrease over time. And menopause, generally our levels are about 60% of where our peak values were, in our early 20s. And as you can see here with this slide, DHEA can, sound pretty amazing, right? In terms of immune function and helping us with stress and our lipids and our bones and, managing, not really managing weight, but helping to promote good metabolism and muscle mass and not having too much in the way of body fat, possibly even having a lesser, allergic response to different components can also facilitate good sleep and also protective neuro-wise thinking brain. So definitely, I feel like if you read about DHA, it's like, oh my goodness, we all are going to want DHEA. We do want to have some DHA. We don't have too much because if we have too much DHA, it may kind of lead us to kind of having too higher levels of other hormones like testosterone. When I've used DHEA as a note, supplementally, very, very small amounts, not 50 milligrams that you may see a bodybuilder potentially use, but using 5, 10, even 15, milligrams of DHEA, I have been able in some individuals to increase serum testosterone values when those levels are low. I think that's very appropriate. I haven't seen anecdotally using a small amount of DHA having any negative impact of actually boosting up a serum estradiol level. So yes, it absolutely could happen. I think it's going to generally happen when you use larger amounts or when you're using something like DHA when it's not clinically appropriate. So again, kind of making sure that we're identifying what would be the most helpful and then, individualizing care, from there. So, what leads to hormonal imbalances? Well, one, within the BACC community, I'd say first and foremost, it could be diagnosis, chemotherapy, radiation, those factors. Stress would absolutely come with a diagnosis. Other factors could be a blood sugar dysregulation. It could be a thyroid disruption. Could be that our diet is really, more of a standard American diet, kind of known as that SAD diet. We could be experiencing digestive related challenges that could even be related to food allergies or food chemical sensitivities. Body weight, if we're really heavy, overweight, obese, is going to increase inflammation. Endocrine, tumors or diseases, things like Addison's or Cushing's when cortisol's too high or too low. And then again, certainly different kinds of cancers would come into play. I mentioned the chemo and radiation. And then xenoestrogens just kind of are going to be those, chemicals that we are exposed to, in our environment, toxins, pollutants, disrupting chemicals that, that could be pesticides, herbicides, and so forth that, really can impact our levels of estrogens and then hence create some sort of an imbalance, there. So in a very kind of, generic way, like what would be one slide of kind of how do we help to balance our hormones naturally? I'm going to give more details from this, but just to kind of at least set the stage a little bit. One, could be that if we have too high of carbs, that we can kind of swap some carbs for healthy fats like avocados and coconut and wild caught fish, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, seeds, and also protein. Not that we can't have any protein, that we can't have any carbohydrates, but just that we're not getting too many carbohydrates. So we're making sure if our body's a little bit less adept to really utilizing glucose and utilizing carbohydrates, metabolizing those well, we probably want to then increase that protein fat and maybe lower that carbohydrate ratio a little bit. There could be one area that we're considering. Could be that we're, and also I think generally speaking, that's one of the best ways, if not the best way, to kind of really ward off that kind of sugar-driven, roller coaster is to make sure we're getting in plenty of protein and healthy fats. That and fats, while years back, what was that in our 80s, 90s, it was like, oh no, we want to have fat-free, fat-free, fat-free. But fats serve as a building block to hormones. So if we have a fat-free diet, you may find that, wow, yeah, I'm really deficient in various hormones. You may even see, cholesterol be very, very low, and kind of even like too low, if we don't have any fat, in the diet. So again, we don't have excessive amount. We want to have healthy fats, but definitely they can be one of those areas to really help be beneficial in this area. So supplementation could be an option. We're going to talk about some different kinds, but could be something like vitamin D3 with K2. Magnesium is one that's hard to go wrong. We kind of generally all can benefit from magnesium. I'll bring that up a little bit later. B vitamins I find are absolutely crucial for hormone regulation, kind of serving as cofactors at the base. Probiotics, omega-3s, it could be botanical adaptogens we're keeping in mind, like holy basil, ashwagandha, eleuthero. Not that we're going to do all of these things, but all different considerations. Being mindful of different medication influences. This could be, kind of in honestly a little less than this population, but I think oftentimes of birth control, but it could also be other kinds of meds that are going to influence, hormones. Making sure that we are regularly having bowel movements, and regularly, I mean, ideally twice a day, definitely once a day. So even if you're like, well, regularly for me is once a week, I want to change that because that is absolutely a way we can kind of clear toxins and things out of your system. So we want that to be, getting out, making sure that we're prioritizing sleep. Sometimes prioritizing sleep doesn't necessarily equate to you sleeping well and having great sleep quality, but certainly that is my goal. And we'll talk about sleep momentarily. Just self-care overall, anything that you can do to kind of really help have both your, physical and also your mindset, be in a good space. I think is absolutely, crucial. Our brain perceives a threat in the form of these endless to-do lists or overwhelming obligations, and that's going to send chemical message to our body to kind of be prepared for an attack, and that may impact our, thyroid, that may impact other, our cortisol, and then those hormones impact, how are you feeling day to day, and your energy, and your weight, and your sleep, and your libido, and those factors. So we want to kind of do what we can. Oftentimes, I'm always kind of making sure that we're acknowledging all that you are doing. Yes, we all have goals. I'm sure we all have things that we haven't yet achieved or that we're aiming to achieve. It's good to have goals, but don't forget all the things that you're doing really beautifully for yourself. Um, Making sure, if possible, to kind of address those emotional imbalances, as we know that if we're really anxious, that's going to increase insulin resistance. That's going to increase, different, honestly, kind of the development, promotion, metastasis of breast and ovarian cancer. So we want to make sure, not that we're not going to ever be anxious, but that we're doing what we can to address these different imbalances there. And then possibly even utilizing something like essential oils here, because they can be very powerful hormone, supporters that can kind of keep the body, in balance, whether we're using them to kind of calm stress, to soothe symptoms, to kind of support underlying hormone balance. Um, I created a slide for you all just to kind of look at some different specific oils that were related to different common symptoms that we may see related to menopause or perimenopause if you're in the influx space. And if interested, I did also kind of do a little bit of research on what would be some different, recipes. So if that's something of interest, let me know or let Colleen know, and I'll be sure to kind of share some of those. I'm sure you could find them, online and stuff, as well, but I didn't want to take too much time and keep our slides awry in terms of going too deep in this area. I'm not an expert in essential oils, but I think sometimes when we're like consuming so much in terms of our foods and supplements, sometimes just not having to put something into our mouth can also be something that can be kind of very like, welcomed. So could be possibly, an option here. And then more of my focus naturally is what about nutrition, healthy foods for having healthy hormones? So one, yes, in an ideal world, I know we don't live in one, but if we could, what are our goals? And really kind of striving to incorporate organic and unprocessed foods as much as we can, particularly getting in cruciferous vegetables and our green leafy vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables are amazing in so many different ways. One of those areas is going to be the compound sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is a compound that is found in cruciferous vegetables, hence this slide of 1 ounce of broccoli radish microgreens that you can see there on the left of my large slow cooker, and on the right, 24 cups of raw broccoli. Why am I showing you these kind of both of these? These are both fantastic. Yes, I eat broccoli. Yes, I eat microgreens. The reason I wanted to really point this out is that 1 ounce of broccoli radish microgreens is equivalent to 4 pounds or the 24 cups of raw broccoli that you see on the right in terms of sulforaphane, that anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer compound. That compound seems to be particularly beneficial for hormonally related cancers and also a variety of other types of, conditions. And it also is one that kind of comes at things from various pathways, and it kind of targets cancer in a variety of mechanisms. So I think that's one I always am striving. Like, all right, can I get in 1 ounce of those broccoli radish microgreens on a regular or daily basis? Why do I keep mentioning the radish also? Yes, radish is part of a cruciferous vegetable family, but radish, as well as mustard seed powder or mustard seeds, daikon, wasabi, arugula, those kind of pretty strong bitter ones, they have an enzyme called myrosinase. I won't get too scientific on you, but long story short, when you have the sulforaphane and the myrosinase, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals much more than 2. So combining the broccoli and radish, you get a lot more bang for your buck than if you just did broccoli or you just did radish. Hence why I'm kind of utilizing that combination, there. So cruciferous vegetables, absolutely, fantastic that we want to incorporate in there. All those dark leafy greens. Um, Typically, I'm going to say we want to have double, triple the amount of vegetables than fruit. If we get in all those vegetables and fruits, that's going to help to get in our fiber. I'll show you here. If our goal is to get in 30 to 45 grams of fiber on a daily basis, I'm oftentimes asked, Natalie, how can we do that? My go-to, and this does not have to be your go-to, but as an option, if we can get in on average 3 cups or more of vegetables, that's going to give about 12 grams of fiber. Now, if you chose 3 cups of lettuce, it's only going to give you like three. If you chose 3 cups of artichoke hearts, that's going to give you more like my goodness, 42, so it can range. But on average, if you're like, oh, I had some carrots, some broccoli, some lettuce, some spinach, some garbanzo, excuse me, some asparagus, then you're going to, on average, get about 2 grams for half a cup. So if we can get in 3 cups or more vegetables, and you can get in 2 servings of fruit, I would space those fruit servings out. I'm using here a half a cup of berries and an apple as an example, as berries are coming into season and are amazing right now. And then I like to add in a fiber booster like sacha inchi seeds. Those are one of my favorites. I'll bring up that in a moment. Ground flaxseed and or chia seeds. And not meaning you have to have 2 tablespoons of each of those, but just cumulatively together. If you got those in and you have those veggies and fruit, you're likely going to meet that goal without a problem. But as you can see, certainly if you incorporate a little bit of beans or legumes, lentils and so forth, And or if you're having a little bit of, sweet potatoes, quinoa, wild rice, then likely again you're going to get a few more grams there and you're going to meet that goal. If we don't have any fiber until dinner, it's going to be really challenging to get all of that in one meal, and you probably will not feel very well. So we want to kind of space things, out in that way. But getting in that fiber is going to be definitely a crucial piece. Um, Also, we want to make sure we're getting in a good amount of protein and high quality protein. Here, just to show you a little bit in terms of protein. Generally speaking, I'm aiming for you to get in a good 1.2, if not 1.5 grams of protein per desired kilogram body weight. So if you know you're really kind of struggling to maintain your weight and you're trying to gain weight, and then I would say 1.5 definitely. You may even boost that up if your albumin levels are low. You may even boost it up closer to 1.7, 1.8, even 2.0. If you're like, no, I'm at a pretty good body weight or I want to kind of lose weight, I would say 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per desirable kilogram body weight because we need protein for muscular growth, for cellular repair, for manufacturing these hormones, for enzymes, for antibodies. We definitely want to make sure we're getting in different kinds of proteins. What could those be? If we were to look at some different animal protein sources, I've created a chart here that you can see, generally speaking, for kind of standard serving sizes, how much protein are you getting in these different foods? Doesn't mean you have to eat any or all of these, but just again, to give you a reference. And then I also created a couple slides here for plant protein sources, as these oftentimes are a little bit more unknown of how much am I getting, of protein, in different things. And you can see definitely we can get a variety of protein sources in different plant foods. But it is important sometimes to kind of note, like recently I had a patient who was like, well, I had quinoa for my dinner, so I covered my protein. I'm like, okay, so quinoa is great. It's going to be a healthy carbohydrate. It's going to give you some fiber. It will give a little bit of protein, but as you can see here, a half a cup of cooked quinoa generally is going to get about 4 grams of protein. So if our goal is 25, 30 grams of protein with that meal, quinoa and veggies isn't going to be enough to really get you there, right? So it could be that we need to kind of compile some of these plant foods to help make sure you're getting in that goal on a, kind of a meal basis. Some of my favorite protein boosters, I would call them. So not you incorporate these and boom, you've met your protein goal for the meal or for the day. But I do consider them a booster as they can really help to significantly get you closer to meeting that goal within that particular meal. So nutritional yeast, as you can see here on this kind of bottom middle picture, it can be about 5 grams of protein per 1 tablespoon. So nutritional yeast may not be the best in your chia pudding or your smoothie, but in a soup, in a homemade dressing, in a homemade dip, in a stir fry, it's definitely a good area that you can kind of add nutritional yeast to get in more of that protein. Can also be give for B vitamins, a little bit of iron in there too, if that's appropriate and you like it. Another option could be hemp hearts or the inside of hemp seeds. They're about 3 grams of protein per tablespoon. They're a little bit more neutral, I think, in terms of flavor. So definitely you could add them to, chia pudding, an overnight oat, a smoothie. They can be kind of added to things that are more sweet or savory. But they could definitely be, again, a good addition. They're going to not give you necessarily too much in the way of fiber, but they will give you that protein. And they also, of course, all will give you a decent amount of omega-3 fatty acids. And then I mentioned earlier Sacha inchi seeds. They're one of my favorites. They're not necessarily one that many people know about. Why are they one of my favorites? I love them because I feel like they're like a great trifecta. Because 2 tablespoons, and I know this varies based on the brand, but thinking of different brands that I have oftentimes used, 2 tablespoons, and you can see here, these are pictures of Sacha inchi seeds on the right. So they kind of look almost like a little bit like a flattened peanut, if you will. So they're much larger than you're going to see than like a chia seed or, or flax seed. So you can kind of use them more as a, snack. You could also chop them and put them in different things, or however you prefer. You could also create it into a powder or purchase a powder and use the powder in a smoothie or a chia pudding or overnight oat or something like that. But 2 tablespoons give you 9 grams of protein, 5 grams of fiber, and they're also rich in plant-based omega-3 fatty acids. So they are one of my favorites. I will always travel with Sacha Inchi seeds. If you just don't quite get enough, fiber or protein in a meal, or I'm a little bit hungry, stuck on a plane for longer than I thought it would be, I will definitely like to have Sacha Inchi seeds in my bag to kind of pull out. Not eat 5 cups of them because yes, they will indeed have calories, but having a couple tablespoons, even 4 tablespoons, depending on what my, goal is and what I'm needing, could absolutely be appropriate and a great little, adjunct there. You can get 100% organic, Sacha Inchi seeds online. You can get them occasionally at certain health food stores. I will share that the first Sacha Inchi seed I ate, I wasn't so sure I love such inchy seeds, but I have grown to definitely really enjoy them and love them. If you're a go-getter, you're like, oh yeah, this is good for me. I can eat it. Yes, you'll be able to do so. If you're like, I don't know, Natalie's a little bit too far on that edge. I'm not sure I can follow that. You may then want to go with one that's salted or flavored rather than having no flavor, at all. Just again to kind of whet your appetite a little bit to, utilize these Sacha Inchi seeds. And obviously, it's not that you have to use Sacha Inchis. They just could be a great way to help get up plant protein and help you to achieve, meeting that protein goal, for the day and giving you some fiber and also giving you, some of those healthy omega-3 fatty acids, which is another thing that we want to make sure we're getting in specifically for healthy hormones. So our omega-3s food-wise are going to be the cold water fish, the chia seeds, the flax seeds, the walnuts, the sacha inchi seeds, the hemp hearts, and then more of our neutral but possibly protective fats, omega-9s would be your olive oil, your avocados. Um, you could also utilize some coconut. That's a bit more of a medium chain saturated fatty acid. And obviously happy to go into more details on omega-3s. Other basics for just healthy hormones, it could be that we just simply want to have a solid, high quality multivitamin that uses activated or methylated B vitamins. Because again, they are really crucial for kind of that cofactors for hormones. I also see that zinc is absolutely crucial in this role. And then, as I mentioned earlier, magnesium is definitely going to be a big one. I think I show out some magnesium sources. I'll hold that until, because I think I have a slide later. And like I said, the omega-3s, possibly two even probiotics to facilitate, proper digestion, absorption of nutrients, to kind of really enhance that mucosal cell membrane, making sure too that we're just not having hopefully too much in the way of reflux or constipation, diarrhea, bloating, et cetera, there. Being mindful of our intake of caffeine, of nicotine, and alcohol, as those definitely could disrupt hormone metabolism. And then doing what we can to kind of avoid or limit, like kind of excessive levels of stress and, poor sleep or excessive work. I am guilty of that. And or excessive exercise. I absolutely want you to be utilizing physical movement and activity. But it could be that if we're, running 4 hours a day every day, that's going to kind of wear you down, there. So definitely some basic things here that are going to be, kind of just really, critical to kind of set the foundation. So how do we manage some of these typical challenges? So I thought I would first, and kind of, I'm not going to be able, of course, go through all kinds of hormonal challenges, but I tried to hit what I find generally to be those that are the most common. And I do find that I'm oftentimes hearing, Natalie, I'm eating healthily, I'm moving, I'm exercising, and my weight is just going the wrong direction. They're not happy with their weight going up or having a real significant challenge of losing weight. And absolutely, as we were talking earlier, if those hormones really kind of plummet down, thinking estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, then absolutely weight gain, we know, is a common symptom of menopause and experienced by at least 60 to 70%. of women, in this area. And on average, probably a good 15 pounds can even be on a yearly basis. So we do want to make sure that we're trying to kind of get in there early and kind of capture that so that we're not behind the ball too much. Protein and fiber, as I was just noting, those are key. Additionally, undoubtedly, we need strength training to build that muscle mass so that gets your metabolism moving. You don't have to be benching 400 pounds, but a 2 pound hairbrush, we got to go heavier than that. Do you have to go for 90 minutes 4 times a week? No, but I would say at least 3 times a week and at least 15 minutes each session. Start there and then you can kind of build, accordingly, that way. But definitely that's going to be a key piece. And then other areas that I like to consider are, is inflammation driving body weight, gain? Is blood sugar imbalance, hemoglobin A1C, a fasting insulin, is that driving the weight? Is it lack of or excessive sex hormones? And or is it cortisol and that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis that is imbalanced, that's driving, weight? Or is it all of these? Hopefully not all, but oftentimes what I'll want to do is, in addition to making sure that we're covering the protein and fiber and the strength training, is get us a good idea of, looking at some laboratory assessments and seeing for, each of you as an individual, what are our, like, where's our priority? What do we really kind of need to work on to provide you the greatest, success and kind of that easy, kind of most streamlined process? So HS, or high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and homocysteine are two common markers for inflammation. Hemoglobin A1C and fasting insulin are two common markers that are assessing kind of blood sugar dysregulation. If coded appropriately, these should be mainstream, covered by, insurance, not something that we should be struggling to have to pay some, high rates for. Measuring cortisol is a little bit different. That one you actually want to do ideally through urine, possibly through, saliva. So like it's a little bit trickier. That's not normally as much mainstream. You have to kind of go more looking at, out-of-network labs frequently. Three other thoughts on this same kind of topic. One would be, would we consider the use of a fasting mimicking diet? And that's a 5-day protocol. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. A lot of the research down by Walter Longo in Southern California. It's a 5-day protocol that your body perceives that you're fasting, but you are actually getting in some calories, not a lot. It's like 1,100 the first day, 600 to 800 on the day 2 through 5, but enough where you maintain muscle mass the way that this is formulated. But yet we do see over time that weight loss in just one 5-day typically isn't probably going to be enough, but the research has generally used 5 days once a month for 3 consecutive months. There's a diabetes trial, they did 6 consecutive months. And happy to talk more on that if that's of interest to anyone. But that absolutely could be one foot in the door technique to helping get your weight a little bit lower. Another thought would be to use a probiotic that is specifically designed to increase GLP-1. And that's been shown to increase or improve insulin sensitivity and to reduce sugar cravings and other kinds of food cravings. So if you know that cravings are one of your downsides, that could be a thought. And then another thought, there is a fermented hops extract that this research was really founded all by the New Zealand government, a handful of years back. But this product, definitely, I'm not saying any brands yet. I know this isn't CEUs, but I'm just trying to be very clean and not share any brands unless I'm asked. And then Colleen, I will defer to you to see if I'm able to do that or not. Should there be interest there? If there's not, that's also perfectly fine. I'm not associated with any of these companies. But I was just keeping it very clean. And here, the fermented hops extract has been shown to significantly decrease appetite. So I think in one of the research trials I was reading, it was like 18% reduction with this fermented hops extract versus 24% with the GLP-1 medication. So yeah, the GLP-1 got greater response theoretically, but as soon as you stop it, then it would change. And then also there could be, of course, negative repercussions that may come with that. But there also could be positive ones. So that's a whole other, area of discussion too. But some thoughts that could help you to target, how do I get a hold of my weight and make sure that my weight is in a healthy space? One of the other areas that we frequently see is blood sugar starting to kind of really go up, during perimenopause and menopausal years. And particularly if menopause happens overnight due to medication, due to surgery, due to chemotherapy. Um, and I will always look at a fasting glucose, ideally under 90 milligrams per deciliter. If you're not fasting, then I would do it like 2 hours after a meal, and then you could see that it could be a little bit higher. Hemoglobin A1C. I'm picky, so this is not necessarily what may get flagged, but kind of on Natalie's picky scale. Ideally 4.7, 4.8 to 5.3 percent. And then insulin, if it's a fasting insulin, critical marker for metabolic health and the best proxy for mitochondrial function. Mitochondria, that's the engine of your cells. So we want your mitochondria to really be functioning because you're going to feel so much better if that is the case. But if we have high fasting insulin or high A1C or high glucose, that is definitely linked more to driving every stage of breast cancer. And likely we will see this with ovarian cancer as well and other solid tumors too. Um, and we also, of course, are going to see higher fasting insulin with diabetes and higher blood pressure and higher cholesterol and weight gain and, reduced lifespan and non-favorable, areas. So I'm not big in terms of too many rules, but one rule that I think can be helpful without needing to have, calculus derivatives or using a calculator is what I call the 10 to 1 rule. And that is that when you're looking at a label, and granted, the healthiest foods don't even come with a label, but a lot of foods we eat do, that for every 10 grams of total carbohydrates that you see listed on a label, you want there to be at least one, preferably more, grams of fiber. So if you see something that says 35 grams of carbohydrate, to me, that doesn't necessarily say that you can or can't have it. If it only has 2 grams of fiber, I'm going to say, there's probably definitely a much better option. But if it was 35 grams of carbohydrate and it had 7 grams of fiber, I'd be like, oh, what is this? Does it give you is it a good balance? So that's one kind of simple little thing you can use if you're at the market or if you're ordering things online. Other strategies to help improve blood sugar regulation. Naturally, trying to really limit or avoid those processed, refined, kind of the white foods that we call them. And of course, I'm not talking about cauliflower or garlic or things like that in this things, but kind of white processed, refined flour, sugars, foods that have added sweets, and so forth, making sure we get that fiber in. One of the things I always like to do is rather than focusing on what you're trying to get out of your diet, what are we trying to get into your diet? And both with blood sugar and with weight, I want to make sure you've got a good amount of dietary fiber in, that you're consuming on a daily basis. When or if you do consume carbohydrates, whether that's a bowl of oatmeal, it's an apple, that birthday, cake, whatever occasional, even if you were like occasionally having that glass of wine, don't have the carbohydrates by themselves. Always pair it with some protein and some healthy fats because that will limit the way that the glucose goes, is kind of spiking up and down and kind of make more what we call little rolling hills. Limit just kind of those starchy carbohydrates, more of the, particularly even if it's, honestly, whole grains, but kind of not getting in 10 servings a day, but maybe having one, two, three servings on a daily basis. Of those, just to kind of be modifying the amount of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Being mindful of beverages that have added calories. Definitely avoid high fructose corn syrup altogether, but there are definitely a lot of things out there that will add calories in there. So be aware of those. Again, getting in healthy fats, particularly omega-3 fatty acids, seem to help improve insulin sensitivity. So that's the cold water fish, the chia, the flax, the sacha inchi seeds, and so forth. Magnesium-rich foods, five richest sources: spinach, chard, pumpkin seeds, hemp hearts, chia seeds. Yes, you'll also get magnesium in a lot of other kinds of foods, but just kind of ounce for ounce, those are your five richest dietary sources. Making sure we're getting good level of vitamin D. I would say good level is definitely above 40 nanograms per milliliter, ideally 60. So don't let somebody just tell you it's normal because normal could be in some of these reference ranges, sad to say. It could even be that the normal is listed as 28 or 30. So I want to make sure you're well above 40. ample research to suggest we definitely above 40 and likely even closer to 60 because it absolutely can help in terms of blood sugar and also inflammation. Cinnamon, a half a teaspoon of cinnamon a day could be a way to help, give a little bit extra benefit from a blood sugar perspective. You could add that to a smoothie, chia pudding, overnight oats, a stir fry, a tea, whatever way that you enjoy. Being mindful in terms of evening snacking and even just the evening meal size. Part of that's timing, and part of that's if we go for a snack at 9 o'clock at night, it doesn't tend to be microgreens with olive oil and, kimchi. It tends to be, you know, ice cream, cookies, cakes, pretzels, popcorn, things that may not necessarily give us the greatest amount of nourishing phytochemicals, fiber, protein, healthy fats. Be mindful of caffeine, particularly in the sense of cortisol. So it could be that you're one who's not very sensitive to caffeine and you can have one, 2 servings caffeine, no problem. Not looking to have four, but even that 1, 2 oftentimes could be appropriate, but that can impact cortisol. So that's what I'm just thinking of, there. Um, and then naturally being mindful in terms of limiting or avoiding alcohol. As we know, of course, alcohol is going to increase blood sugar, as well. Now, we could give an entire, even 8 hour symposium, but definitely 1 hour on, different ways to kind of improve blood sugar and different supplements. But just put everything in one slide with a reasonable font. These are different supplements that I may consider for some sort of insulin resistance. Some of these basic wise, we could do an omega-3 and a really good multi that could incorporate vitamin D3 and chromium in it. Maybe even get one that has some good amount of magnesium in there as well. And then I may look honestly even more than the L-glutamine as a primary, kind of a key amino acid, berberine. Berberine definitely can also help to lower cholesterol, which is great. But it may be something we don't want to use all the time. And depending on medication, some of these things too, we have to kind of be very mindful of, is it going to interact with any particular medication that you may be, consuming? But there are studies to look at about 1,500 milligrams of berberine, 500 3 times a day, or 500, three caps a day anyway, to lower glucose, A1C, insulin, and improve that insulin sensitivity. And then over here on the right, R-lipoic acid is a more bioavailable version of alpha lipoic acid. And alpha lipoic acid is also, it's a cellular antioxidant and absolutely been shown to help improve insulin sensitivity. Um, with alpha lipoic acid, generally research is looking even at 600, even 1,200 milligrams a day. A lot of times these are 100 milligram capsules, so that could be a very large, kind of handful of things. R-lipoic acid, I think even 300 milligrams, which there are a couple brands that you can even do 300 milligrams in one cap, could be enough for some, but it may be a little higher. And again, in a perfect world, can I measure your levels of omega-3, D, magnesium, chromium, alpha lipoic acid, glutamine? Like there aren't berberine levels per se, but if I can measure those and see where your levels are, obviously, if you have sufficient status of alpha lipoic acid, then I'm not going to suggest you take more of it. But if you are deficient, then it would be very appropriate to add that alpha lipoic acid or R-lipoic acid to the mix on there. Um, I brushed over glutamine here, but there is some research to show that it could be beneficial for insulin resistance. It is an amino acid. It is the primary fuel for the lining of the intestinal tract, so it's great for gut healing and gut repair. So those are things that we may consider. Some people use glutamine for sugar cravings. Sometimes it works beautifully. Sometimes I haven't seen it always work, but could be a consideration. So, what about cognitive fog, brain fog? Because Natalie, I also oftentimes said, Natalie, this is an area that I'm really challenged in, as well. And so here, one, we know that estrogen modulates neurotransmitter levels. So that's going to include serotonin uptake. That's going to include you synthesizing dopamine, another neurotransmitter. And these are going to be vital for your mood and cognitive function. And conversely, cortisol, which can really reduce our production of serotonin, kind of our happy molecule. And it can increase us breaking down norepinephrine, and that can lead to a mood destabilization and kind of impairing our cognitive function. So, high or low estrogen, high or low cortisol could be one of those areas that's really kind of triggering that cognitive fog. So, those could be areas that we're assessing, and can we do anything about it to help you feel a little bit better? Nonetheless, we know exercise and daily physical activity, mindfulness-based stress reduction, that's my MBSR abbreviation there. Sauna, if appropriate and okay, depending on lymph node situation. Sleep hygiene, if we can get 7 to 8 hours, ideally, of sleep nightly, would be fantastic. And that all of these factors absolutely play a pivotal role in our typical day-to-day brain function as well. If we just said, generally speaking, what are we aiming for food-wise? I would say a healthy Mediterranean, plant-forward kind of nutrition plan that is rich in those anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids, that is also low glycemic. So things that are going to make sure that we're not spiking up that glucose too high. Some of the key dietary components that I would put in, and I kind of stated this as brain resilience, here, polyphenols. These are also absolutely great for the gut. So I've got something like, note that part. Where do we get polyphenols? Polyphenols are antioxidants. These are components that have a significant anti-inflammatory effect. They also support neurogenesis. So if they can support kind of that nerve transmission and nerve generation, that's going to also be helpful for our brain. And polyphenols absolutely are, like I said, key for the gut microbiome, too. Some of our richest sources, berries, cherries, because those are in season, pomegranate, but a little harder to find pomegranate at this time of the year. But come those winter months, pomegranate can be a great option because oftentimes we don't have berries and cherries at that other time of the year. Green tea, even more potent, matcha, because you're blending up those green tea leaves. Coffee does also offer that. So for those of you coffee lovers are like, no, and oftentimes I'll say you can still have coffee, but maybe even start with a cup of green tea or a cup of matcha and then have the, coffee that if you know you're going to be doing that. And another source, there are definitely many other sources, but one of the sources that oftentimes comes really high on the list are capers, but we don't tend to eat a half a cup of capers, we may only eat a teaspoon of them. So ounce for ounce, we're not getting, ounce for ounce, we're getting a lot, but for the amount that we may actually consume, that's why I didn't put it on here. And then also I noted here olive oil. And olive oil is like a big, there's a big difference. You can see kind of a very poor quality, low polyphenol olive oil, a decent daily olive oil that's an extra virgin olive oil that has some polyphenols. And then you can also find olive oils that are very high polyphenols. Typically, those are the ones that you may not want to cook with, but that you may use for drizzling in salads because they tend to be pricier. But absolutely, that can be an area that we're looking at. And also within olive oil, one of the areas that I'm interested in researching that I haven't seen a lot of research yet, but starting, is hydroxytyrosol, and definitely an area that we are seeing cardiovascular benefits. And again, this is olive oil, but I am absolutely interested in seeing, I think we're going to see a lot of anti-cancer components with hydroxytyrosol that is also found in very high quality olive oils. So that can be another thought. The omega-3 fatty acids that I mentioned earlier. So yes, the cold water fish, and then also those different plant sources that I've noted. These are going to be key for structural brain support, and they also decrease neuroinflammation. And then your day-to-day foods and fats that we want to have in there, the monounsaturated fatty acids that are going to be olive oil, olives, avocados, avocado oil, macadamia nut oil. We don't tend to see as much just because it tends to be a little bit on the pricier side, here too. But monounsaturated fats are linked to preserved memory and improved vascular function. So that's another good reason we want those in for our brain. Leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables, if you're ever in doubt, those are almost always the answer. They're associated with slower cognitive aging. Nuts, again, healthy fats, neuroprotective, not just because of the fats, but they have phytochemicals, plant chemicals that are in there that are very protective. So these are linked to better memory in observational studies, more research needed here. Even whole grains and legumes, fiber, which we know is going to be crucial for our microbiome, but also the micronutrients that whole grains and legumes offer that support glycemic control and also microbiome health, good for the brain. Fermented foods. Kimchi is probably one of the richest dietary sources of probiotics without, kind of altering it further, but also could be kefir yogurts, could be non-dairy kefir yogurts. ACV is my abbreviation for apple cider vinegar. So not an apple cider vinegar that is very clear that you can see through, but the one that kind of gets that kind of sediment on the bottom, that is tells you that yes, there's probably some good probiotics in that particular bottle of apple cider vinegar. Not meaning you're drinking it, but that you could use it in different ways and foods and beverages, there. But fermented foods are absolutely key for the gut-brain kind of axis, kind of which is the communication back and forth between the gut and the brain and helping to kind of modulate those. Even soy and red clover isoflavones that are found in those particular foods are known to be, of course, phytoestrogens that are plant substances that are structurally similar to estrogen, but that allow them to bind to estrogen receptors in the body. But because they're 100 to 1,000 times weaker in potency and activation than your typical estrogen, they can honestly even promote kind of a balance of estrogen, an estrogen homeostasis, if you will, during menopause. So, do I want to use supplements in this sense? No, I'm just talking in terms of food sources. And of course, if you have an allergy or possibly an autoimmune condition that could be contraindicated, then we would, look otherwise. But these could be, some dietary considerations for many. And then if we're thinking about supplemental support for cognitive health, I could talk all day on the potentials here, but again, for basics, foundational, I would say the omega-3 fatty acids. Again, if we can get in a really good multivitamin, it could be that we can incorporate the D, the B, and at least 100 milligrams of that magnesium in a multi so that your foundation, you're already kind of set. Maybe we're putting in probiotic, prebiotic polyphenols with our food, but if appropriate and you wanted more, you could add it in supplementally. And then other supplements that are kind of more specific in terms of cognitive function, and certainly not meaning that anyone would take all of these, but it could be worth investigating further if one or two may particularly offer you additional cognitive, support. So ginkgo has been, shown for many, many years to possibly have some brain supportive effects. Because it interacts with a lot of medications, honestly, it's not one that I've used the most with patients, but there is a fair amount of research on ginkgo and memory. Resveratrol, and particularly trans resveratrol, has been shown in some of the research to have positive changes in cognitive function and also be able to increase quality of life. This is looking at research that was using 75 milligrams. BID is 2 times a day. I probably should have put that in a different form. Bacopa, also known as Bacopa monnieri, but just for simplicity, Bacopa, this is one of my newer favorites, to be honest. Helps with attention, executive function, helps with domains of learning and memory, and also of language. There was a 2020 meta-analysis of 9 studies. This was on older individuals who were healthy. They had mild memory impairment. And on average, I see 300, 450 milligrams on a daily basis. And in that particular trial, it showed improved cognitive performance, particularly attention speed. And they did this over 12 to 24 weeks of supplementation. I looked at a lot of different trials just to kind of average out what are most trials using, and it seemed that 300, 450, sometimes the studies were once a day, sometimes they were twice a day, hence why I'm kind of giving you that, a little bit of a larger, range, there. Other potential things that I may consider lion's mane as one of the therapeutic mushrooms that could have some particular benefit on cognitive function. that you could definitely even eat. Curcumin, we know, of course, has significant anti-inflammatory properties. Definitely has, various ways that it may modulate, kind of cancer pathways. I think one of the challenges with curcumin is it going to interfere or interact with a certain medication? So that can be one of the potential downsides, but absolutely been shown to improve overall cognitive function. Um, typically I've seen, even at like zero point 0.8 grams a day, kind of over a 24-week period. I think the key with curcumin is honestly the form, because that's going to make a big difference of kind of potency. And happy to kind of go into Q&A, on that if there are questions, in that way. But I was also just looking at a 2024 systematic review, and this was one that they were looking at the use of curcumin supplementation, and it did lead to a statistically significant improvement in cognitive performance, and it was helpful with executive function as well. Um, ALA is alpha lipoic acid that we were just speaking about for blood sugar. It also has shown to have very strong neuroprotective benefits in preclinical models, so kind of test tube. The clinical evidence is still pretty limited, but it could be one that we're looking at to see what do we learn in the next year or two. But right now is more inconclusive, but just thinking in kind of ways that something that may benefit you in more than one, way. PC is phosphatidylcholine, and choline, I think, also is very promising, largely preliminary. Um, this is an area that I think is perhaps very genomic kind of dependent. I do find that choline containing phospholipids, GPC, glycerol, choline phosphate is one that you'll see sometimes in supplementations. They seem to kind of have very benefits, particular promising benefits, but it does seem that if there are genomic variants, that it may particularly benefit those individuals compared to those who don't have genomic variants in different choline related SNPs, little pieces of your DNA. I love looking at all this kind of stuff. So if we've got genomics at our fingertips, it also helps to kind of create a more personalized plan specifically for you, that unless you have a twin, identical twin, no one else has those exact same genomic, markers here. And again, I could go on and on for other possible, components, but just for simplicity, I'll leave it at that. For our cognitive components, which certainly, if we're not sleeping, that also can impair our cognitive function. But just some basic things that we want to kind of keep in mind, because no doubt we know that sleep is absolutely crucial for our physical and also our, kind of mental and emotional functioning too. But obviously, it's going to allow our body to really restore and repair ourselves, and it's going to be crucial for your immune system. And and if we don't get enough sleep, we're going to probably find our coordination, our reflexes, our ability to learn new skills will be, hindered, no question. So we know that sleep deprivation absolutely is going to affect our energy intake, our glucose uptake, what I would also even call leptin resistance. So I noted here that sleep deprivation is linked to having higher cortisol, which means if cortisol is higher, you're going to have a harder time kind of turning off and going to sleep. Plus, cortisol higher is going to lead to higher glucose, higher body weight, possibly headaches, possibly hot flashes or night sweats. Again, if you're low, we may want a little higher cortisol, but we don't want to be excessively high. And then leptin, if it lowers leptin is our satiety hormone. So it tells us, oh yeah, I've had enough food, I'm content, I'm satiated. But if we lower that, then we may not have that trigger and like, oh my goodness, I'm just still so hungry, even though I think I've consumed appropriate amount of food. So we don't want to have leptin resistance, because then not only does that, really challenge our sleep, but that also is likely going to then get into our blood sugar and our body weight, challenges too. Um, and sleep and also circadian factors are going to directly impact our appetite, our ability to absorb nutrients, and also our metabolism. And so if we disturb sleep or our circadian rhythms, we know that we can also worsen different kinds of digestive, disorders. And even in terms of disrupting our circadian rhythm, we know that like night shift workers, for example, and not that necessarily individuals choose to be a night shift worker, some may, but others are just like, no, that's just the way that my job is, definitely is linked with, lower melatonin, but it also is linked with higher breast cancer. I don't know there's been as many studies there for ovarian cancer, but um, so these, doing what we can to kind of keep things in check, um, can definitely be, beneficial because sleep is our body's way, our brain's way, I mean, for detoxification. So our body detoxification, we're using our liver, we're using our kidneys, we're using our skin because we're sweating, we're using, a few other kind of, or even our gut because we're eliminating, in terms of bowel movements and so forth. But our brain, we really kind of need that sleep to kind of properly detox. So it's crucial in regulating our cortisol, values, here. So we want to do our best to also balance blood sugar because we know if your sugar goes too low or too high, that can definitely disrupt your sleep. Hence, protein and fiber coming back into play of being two crucial elements to make sure we're doing our best to get in. We know, no doubt, alcohol and caffeine can impact our sleep. And some of you may have experienced that sometimes it's like, well, when I was 25, I didn't have a problem, having this a little bit of alcohol. But it could even be, I find some women in particular that even one glass of wine really disturbs their sleep, that night. So just be cognizant of, where those things are. Obviously, we can talk also in terms of just alcohol with, breast cancer risk. Ovarian cancer, not quite as strong, but definitely in terms of, impacting blood sugar, body weight, and so forth. And then caffeine, that somewhat depends on if you're a fast caffeine metabolizer, a medium one, or a slow caffeine metabolizer. Generally, if you're having caffeine before noon, probably not going to be too much to kind of really throw your system, off. But definitely if we have it later on in the day, or if we have a lot of caffeine, then it may be a kind of a stressor on our adrenals, which can then start to raise blood sugar and our insulin levels. So if you're ever using a continuous glucose monitor, I always like to kind of see, well, what does a little bit of caffeine do to your blood sugar? I point to my arm as if you have a continuous glucose monitor on your arm. Um, and if you have good, regulation, you could arguably have a cup of green tea, even a cup of black coffee, and that glucose should not change. But you may find like, wow, I didn't even add any, sugars or creamers or healthy kinds of even, almond milk, coconut milk, things like that to it, and it still could impact it, then that tells us we need to kind of really work on that glucose metabolism, there. Any kind of, good sleep, regimen and environment, kind of keeping that biological clock and rhythm for like being mindful in terms of screens, because we know that the screens before bed could inhibit our production of melatonin, which is going to help us to be able to, fall asleep. Anything kind of from reading to meditating to listening to music, relaxation stretches, hot baths, showers, Epsom salts, magnesium, lavender, any of these kinds of things could be, vagal nerve, maybe it's singing, maybe it's humming, maybe it's gargling, to kind of stimulate that vagus nerve to kind of bring you from that, kind of, feel like kind of fast, 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 go, go, go back over to kind of rest and restore. There can definitely be important. Keeping kind of a relatively regular eating schedule or regular kind of sleep schedule. Aim to allow 3 hours or more from dinner and also the last thing that you ate to bedtime. Sometimes we have easier control over that than others, but just based on our lives and work schedules and doctor appointments and travel schedules and other things. But if possible, aim to have that 3 hour kind of window there. Utilizing stress management techniques, and then certainly also doing whatever to kind of have some sort of movement here to kind of be able to fall. Probably not exercising at 9 o'clock at night, but getting that exercise or movement earlier in the day that can help us to kind of, allow us to kind of fall asleep and also on the brain front, as well. So thinking of where we were. So we kind of want to be able to get to questions soon, just making sure I'm on target. So I'm almost there. Um, Supplemental sleep support. This also, I could make probably 50 slides. Absolutely not meaning for you to do all these different things, but I just bring them up because you probably have heard of many of these different compounds. And I would say that I find some a little more helpful than others. Melatonin is one that I find very effective to help you fall asleep, but not so effective to help you stay asleep, but definitely can kind of signal that brain to kind of start to relax. Magnesium, similarly, absolutely magnificent to help you fall asleep, but may not necessarily be so useful to kind of keep you asleep at 2 or 3 in the morning. Magnesium we need for like 300 different cellular processes, from your heart to your blood sugar to bone density to muscle cramps to sleep to stress, you name it. Magnesium probably is a good, response. So getting in different kinds of magnesium here. Typically, I would go with a magnesium glycinate as the most bioavailable type of magnesium. If you're really constipated, we may use a magnesium citrate. Um, if you are really looking for like a brain component from headaches or anxiety, there's a type of magnesium called magnesium threonate. It's the only kind of magnesium that crosses the blood-brain barrier. It may be, a very good option too. My go-to is glycinate just because it's a little less expensive than the magnesium threonate, and you can use less capsules. But if you know your issue is definitely a, headache, anxiety piece, the threonate may be appropriate there. Um, GABA gets a little bit messy here, definitely a neurotransmitter, but could be something that we're thinking about. Progesterone lowers, GABA lowers, so it is one that I consider. Glycine and even kind of GABA glycine combinations. Sometimes I've seen those be used in some studies like every 3 to 4 nights, so not necessarily something you're doing every day, but that we're kind of getting in occasionally that can kind of be helpful on a kind of a physical tension. And that's one thing I'll oftentimes ask if you do wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and are you really kind of clenched up and physically tense, that would be a suggestion of, would GABA be beneficial? If you're like, no, I'm very relaxed, my brain is going, it may be that GABA wouldn't be as effective. But if you're waking up physically tense, GABA could be a consideration. There, glycine, amino acid, just an important role in the overall nervous system. What I like with glycine is it's so benign. It's not going to interfere with, virtually anything there. And I have found too that it's generally very well tolerated. So it's, if you take glycine, you don't generally wake up in the morning feeling very groggy. Taking a lot of melatonin, you may feel like you're waking up and still kind of in that groggy state. So I feel like this can kind of be a little bit better from a liveliness, kind of peppiness, piece. Um, Looking to see if I didn't put it all, I didn't, sorry, I skipped it. Theanine. Theanine is one of those amino acids too. You do get theanine in green tea and in matcha. And that's one of the reasons why, the thought of drinking green tea or matcha, while it has some caffeine, can be still very calming because it has that theanine in there. Theanine is another one that is very safe across the board. You can use it during the day, you can use it at night. It's even used in panic attacks. You can use it for uber concentration and focus. And it can be used kind of in a variety of ways, typically 100, 400 milligrams a day, 100, 200 probably during a day. You could go up to a higher amount, later, but it is one of my favorites for kind of just calming the system, but a little less likely going to keep you asleep kind of through the night. Phosphatidylserine could be one to kind of, if you're waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning because your cortisol is starting to go up, phosphatidylserine brings that cortisol back down and may keep you asleep through that 2 to 3 times out time where you're like, oh, good, I'm getting to 4, I'm getting to 5, I'm getting to 6. Now this is getting respectable. Now this is getting to be an appropriate time. Taurine's another amino acid, can sometimes calm anxiety levels because it also is involved with the neurotransmitter GABA, kind of allows the brain to shut off and kind of encourages, rest. It's not one, to be honest, that I tend to use a lot. Apigenin, that's really rich in parsley juice and celery juice. It's one of Vander Huberman's, favorites. I know in there, I've seen some, research there, like 50 milligrams of apigenin. But again, I'll probably look for some other ones, first. Myo-inositol could be another one, could also be something for blood sugar regulation. That one sometimes can be even used like every other night rather than using it, on a daily basis. 5-HTP, this is kind of that precursor to serotonin. So if we know that the issues related to sleep are related to mood and anxiety, particularly if we know it's related to a particular genomic variant, then HTP could be an option. You don't want to use HTP if you have high cortisol. So I don't like to use 5-HTP unless I've tested urinary levels of cortisol to make sure that I wouldn't be exacerbating, a challenge. But if it's been tested and it's not too high, it could be a possible, option. And it could be like simple micro, nutrients like calcium, magnesium, zinc can improve, sleep quality and duration, and even B vitamins can impede our ability to get some. So maybe like you take B vitamins, but maybe you don't take it at dinner, you take them at breakfast and or lunch, so that we're kind of moving those to be at an earlier time. And then another area that's newer in the market in the last year, maybe even not full year, maybe even honestly just less than 6 months, are sleep peptides. So you know about peptides, GLPs and other kinds of things. There are going to be peptides for everything. Thyroid peptides, sleep peptides, weight peptides, you name it, there can be peptides for it. But the sleep peptides are known to modulate what's called the orexin pathway, and it lowers your wake promoting signals and cortisol release so that you kind of support a more natural sleep, drive, deep, sustained sleep. They're so new that I haven't had enough patients use to know, yes, they're definitely beneficial or not. But time will tell. But definitely happy to answer any questions along that side, too. Again, there's so many different areas that we could go, and this absolutely my goal is to not have you take this, long list of various kinds of supplements, but at least to be aware, of them. And then short and sweet hot flashes, night sweats. Be aware in terms of like hot beverages, alcohol, caffeine, spicy foods that can absolutely, influence this. We know that if we reduce that estrogen, it's going to, oftentimes lead to these physiological changes in our brains, thermoregulatory, vasomotor function. Um, Soy or phytoestrogens, even just in terms of foods, could again weakly stimulate the ER estrogen receptor beta receptors that could be there. Obviously, don't want to use supplements in a ER positive breast cancer situation. That could change, but for right now, I'm a little bit more likely to kind of be, cautious there. Could be serotonin support, which I'm sure some of you have seen different medications in a very low dose used specifically not for depression, but used for um, hot flushes. HPA axis support, just kind of really working to kind of modulate, stress. That could be, an area. And then even, anxiolytics, too, for kind of decreasing that. Does it again get into the role of 5-HTP and some of these other, areas? One that I didn't put on here, and I probably honestly, should have, is um, black cohosh, which if you would have asked me 20 years ago, the thought was, well, but black cohosh, maybe it has this estrogen related effect, so we don't want to use in ER positive, breast cancer survivors. What we're finding with the research with black cohosh is it's not going that pathway, it's actually going the serotonin pathway, in which case it would be very safe, to use in this way. So that could be, another thought, as well. So I know I threw a lot at you in our time. I'm definitely opening up to questions. We'll make sure to kind of get you your slides. If you're feeling like, wow, Natalie talks really quickly, this is way too much. There's no way I can kind of do this. We know also to not give up on your dreams. If cauliflower can be pizza and can be noodles, you too can be anything you want. So just a fun little meme that I found at one point that I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to use that one. We can make sure, and again, acknowledge where you are and what you've already achieved, and then just add one or two little goals, from there. Um, Naturally, always want to make sure you have access to all the fun science. So if you really want to get deep in there, that is there. If you need to reach me, you can reach me via my website. Probably you can find other ways of getting in contact with me, too. But I want to shift us now, Colleen, to cues. Um, I'm happy to jump into the chat, or if you want to kind of hit me with
Yeah.
questions, that's also okay.
Okay. Fabulous. Thank you, Natalie. I mean, that was a wealth of information. I won't steal time talking about how fabulous it was. I learned so many new things. Thank you. I did compile the questions, so I can just read them off to you. So hopefully we can
Okay.
get to them all. There are quite a few. One, is it okay to take protein powder? And if yes, is there one you recommend?
Definitely yes. Do I want you to rely on protein powder? Of course not. I want to use your food as the foundation, but if you need a shortcut to kind of help make, meet a goal, you could absolutely use some protein powder. I think which one, honestly, I would rotate through so that you don't always use pea protein 365 days a year or whatever, 300 days a year. They don't always use, so oftentimes I'll use different blends of plant proteins. It could be if some people don't do well with whey, some people really like whey. Research with collagen peptides in the cancer environment, nothing shows us data-wise that collagen increases cancer risk, peptide, in terms of supplementation. Where we are is that theoretically, if collagen is creating growth, would it possibly lead to growth in regards to a cancer? We don't have research to support or refute that, so I'm a little bit cautious. If you're in a, if you're in remission and you're feeling pretty well, I probably wouldn't necessarily utilize collagen peptides. If you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the midst of treatment, everything tastes terrible, I would say use collagen peptides because it's going to be probably the most amenable and the easiest on your palate. Um, just to throw out a few brands, I have no association with these brands. One of the plant blends I think is great is Kachava, Kachava. I love to get connected with them, but I'm not. They're kind of like more like everything in one, but very whole food based. Truvani is another one, Truvani. They're a great clean protein one that does a lot of plant things. There's one called Sprouted Living. It's another one that I really like. Um, I'm sure I could Just Ingredients. It's another company that they've got some different ones. Those are a few that have kind of a variety of ones. And then I can also look, even in terms of, some of the main bigger brands like Garden of Life or Designs for Health and things of that nature. If we can kind of find ways to get things at 20% discount, for example, through Fullscript. I will work to find ways to get discounts on those other brands, and I'm happy to kind of share, if I ever can get, discounts to share with others on that side.
And I know I have signed up for your newsletter and find it helpful. And you do share some of, I think, those discount codes in your newsletter
If I
for
if I can if
those
I
who
can
are
get discounts, I'll
interested.
definitely try to pass them on. So yes.
Thank you. Um, and the next question, should we eat yogurt or probiotics before or after meals to be effective?
It honestly depends on the formulation. If in terms of the food, I think, you can kind of have it at any particular time. On a probiotic supplement, some are formulated to do better with a meal. Some are better to do better away from a meal. So I would say I would defer because there are so many different brands and so many different formulations to kind of defer to see what that particular brand is suggesting. Yeah, that I think can vary. But in generally speaking, of probiotics kind of fueling your, being kind of good gut bacteria and even the prebiotics fueling the growth of your probiotics, just generally there's not a rule of, oh, I have to eat them at 8 a.m. or 5 p.m. or beginning, and just getting them in your diet, generally speaking, is fantastic. So there's not a rule per se, but I think in terms of your question, it would be more probably related to the supplements that could be very kind of formula specific.
Thank you. I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to just do there's a question about sleep, but I think you answered that. And there's a question about which milk to use for women in menopause, and then as well a question around soy or soy milk and ERP or HER2 positive invasive carcinoma and if it affects hormones. And
So, and I would say milk wise, I mean, one of the, challenges with dairy is, is there any association, with different kinds of cancers? With breast cancer, the research seems pretty equivocal, to be honest. Ovarian cancer, there could be an increased risk of dairy or dairy being at, kind of leading to increased risk of ovarian cancer. Prostate cancer, which if I'm talking to all women here, that's not a risk factor, but I will mention just because dairy does seem to increase risk there. Colorectal cancer, dairy may decrease risk, but thinking of breast and ovarian, more equivocal, possibly increasing. Hence, if we're not looking at a dairy-based milk, what kind of non-dairy milk would I advocate for? One, a clean one, possibly organic one, unsweetened, and that doesn't have added oils and gums and things like that. So whether your palate and you prefer an almond versus coconut versus hemp versus pistachio versus pecan, I'm open to you kind of choosing there. It's more of kind of the quality of that product that I'd be more picky of than, what kind of its main derivative, would be. Um, and I'm happy to answer again if there's like, oh, but of this brand or that brand, that kind of thing. But I don't feel like it's necessarily that, oh, well, if you're in menopause, you can only have almond or you can only have coconut or you have to have goat or you have to have that. Like, I don't think that there's a rule. It's kind of more kind of what fits your palate. And again, if you're going for clean and organic and unsweetened, that doesn't have all those kind of added oils and, things like, for example, oat milk. I think oat milk can taste delicious in different kinds of things, but a lot of oat milks, the second ingredient is an oil. So if we're going to use an oat milk, I would say, is it just, a very, very clean one that's not going to add in, these kind of seed oils or something that may not be so favorable for you.
Colleen, can I
I
just
know we're,
interject two quick questions that I have?
mhm. Yes, I think
One
we
is,
have,
uh,
yeah, time for a quick question. We're just
okay,
getting close to the
I
end.
appreciate it. Psyllium husk for reducing LDL, if you think that's good, I seem to be reading a lot of research on that. How much would you say from a serving size daily? And then the 16-8 intermittent fasting.
So I'd say on psyllium, psyllium definitely has good research in terms of cholesterol, in terms of blood sugar, possibly in terms of satiety. If you can get 30 grams or 45 grams of fiber in your diet, in your food, I don't think you need to also add a fiber powder. If you're like, I am just not hitting that goal, then you could absolutely use psyllium. Research generally uses about 7 grams of psyllium in the trials. Obviously, that varies on the trial, but that's typically what a lot of the trials are using. But again, that's an area that if you can get enough in your food, I don't feel like you necessarily have to use a supplemental source, but you absolutely could and safely do so. In terms of intermittent fasting, we could spend all day, on that part too. I definitely favor getting 13 hours or more overnight. Even 13, 14 can be fantastic. And there's a breast cancer trial that did see some benefits over 13 hours, the Well Study, Women's Healthy Eating and Living Study. Um, I would say the 16, I would even some of the metabolic flexibility, if even kind of if you're doing well with intermittent fasting, I would say do 14, 14, 16, 16, or 14, 14, 16, 14, 16, like mix it around. But I don't necessarily think you have to have 16 hours of fasting every day. What I also want to make sure is we don't do too long of a fasting window that then your eating window is so narrow you can't get in enough nutrients. Like a 20 to 4, you only have 4 hours to get everything in. You may feel very bloated and full of getting in all of your nutrition in only a 4 hour, window. And I will also say that women don't always fare as easily with intermittent fasting as men. So you may find that, in some of these relationships and stuff, where you're like, wow, my friend, my husband, has an easier time with this. And I would also say that if your cortisol is low, you're going to have a harder time with fasting and it wouldn't be favorable. If your cortisol's through the roof, we may need to kind of pull things back. But more so if that cortisol is low, we may kind of hold you doing too much of a fasting period until we know that that system is strong enough to be able to kind of handle that. But very excellent questions and definitely all areas that we're talking about. In fact, we are currently talking about fasting mimicking diets and intermittent fasting and kind of all the reasons of why and why not and when and how and all those like in NatPack, which is my group membership. We do a few two Zooms, on a monthly basis, and it's definitely a very common discussion topic and one that the research is growing at an exponential pace. So we got to make sure we stay on top of it, too. So
Thank you. And I know we're over. If I can ask you one more question, there's a question
absolutely.
about markers, and then I kind of combined it with another question that we have here. So, questions about checking and decreasing inflammation. So, for inflammation, uh, I think somebody's asked their doctor if they can check markers, but she suggested it's not necessary. So, if there's any advice about how to talk to a doctor to ask for like which specific markers and maybe why, how to ask that. And then I think if there's any markers, if somebody's been without periods, which hormonal blood tests should somebody maybe be asking for to see if things are in balance?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that There's definitely research to show that if HSCRP is elevated, it doesn't bode as favorably for survivorship. And there are a lot of different trials, a lot of different cancer types that has been, found. I was just quickly looking to see if I had a quick little blurb that I could put in the chat on C-reactive protein that I oftentimes, actually, I'll put in all of these for CRP. I like to look at homocysteine also, even though it's more of a vascular marker of inflammation. It's key for methylation and DNA repair. And I'm not sure that the formatting will go through, but that will give you some information to kind of a little bit of a blurb if that helps. Um, there. But if there's a methylation MTHFR or other kind of genomic variant, which is very common for most of us to have something, then I think it definitely makes sense to look at a homocysteine, value as well. And then definitely there also even kind of the hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, levels. Um, and again, we could definitely compile various, studies, and I think it's, kind of going in as not like I'm demanding I want these, but I was listening, I've been reading, I've been researching. Sounds like it's very strongly associated. And then if this is elevated, I could be very proactive in making sure that I'm reducing this. Would you be willing to run this for this particular reason? And if we ask, I think sometimes nicely, and we don't ask for 40 labs and I only ask for four, I find frequently then we can get docs to, partake. There are certainly other, less expensive ways that we can kind of get options kind of outside. But if your doc will run it and it gets covered through kind of in network and doesn't cost you a penny, then obviously that's my goal is to make sure that you have less additional costs too.
And then for those were being the more hormonal, and then what would, or I mean, more of the inflammation, is there something you would recommend for the hormonal?
I mean, for the sex hormones, in terms of blood work, commonly they're going to look at ultra-sensitive estradiol. I actually like to look at estrone also, just because stress can kind of really drive estrone. Um, your progesterone's probably going to also be, low. I like to see a DHEA S, DHA-S, and then also a testosterone, just to make sure that if we cut off estrogens, what's happening with androgens. Um, but really that I oftentimes will do kind of utilizing a kind of another, outside lab just because it kind of looks at the outside lab can tell me kind of how one is metabolizing estrogen, how one's metabolizing testosterone. So I find that a lot of times we're having symptoms not because our levels are too low or they are good, but we don't feel well or they're too high. It's how's our liver processing and metabolizing these? How's our gut, processing these? And if the numbers are perfect, but everything's getting stuck in the liver, or if everything's perfect, but the liver's like boom, and like shoves it out of the liver so quickly you don't get to utilize and benefit from those hormones, you're not going to feel well. Even if the numbers and the blood tell you, no, everything's normal, it's not your problem. I don't think that's the full picture. And that's why I kind of dig a little deeper on the sex hormones and then absolutely on the adrenal hormones, cortisol, piece too.
But then like seeing the menopause, I think there was one question just more like related to the menopause cutoff, or like you're without periods. How do you know that you're
Typically,
um
I mean, technically 1 year, 12 months, since your last period, but there also they'll oftentimes do estradiol, FSH, and LH, kind of what they call sometimes the triad.
okay.
And FSH in particular, but the FSH and LH, they start to definitely, change, in that menopause time. So they can kind of see like, oh, the level looks, nope, very premenopausal, or nope, it definitely now looks like you're in that postmenopausal. So they'll use those markers, the three combination, because estradiol, of course, if you're not in menopause, it could be that it honestly is one, and then next month it's 300, and then you're 20, and then you're three. Like that marker, in perimenopause goes up and down, but the FSH and LH might kind of give you a more kind of longer trajectory, trend. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you, Natalie. You
absolutely.
covered so much today, and we are so grateful that you were here and able to answer these questions. And thank you all for joining us today. Um, we are hoping to have more information and presentations and series with Natalie in the future, and hopefully do like a longer 6-part series, hopefully one in the fall and one in the spring. So we'll be sharing information about that. And if you are particularly interested, feel free to reach out to me, Colleen at bayareacancer.org or our helpline. And it can get you on an interest list, but we are just grateful to have you all and have this information, Natalie. Thank you all for being here and hope you have a wonderful day. We'll stop.
Enjoy your day, everyone. Thanks for joining.